The other day, I was scrolling through the world's most entertaining social media platform, LinkedIn, and I came across this post. It's a graph of yearly carbon emissions since 1940. The TLDR on this post, and many like it, is this is a dip from COVID, and this is where we need to be by 2050. The argument here is if everyone was stuck at home and no one could go outside, where is all this carbon coming from? Couple this with the US Supreme Court recently kneecapping the EPA, and the bigger question becomes quite clear. Do we have any shot at hitting the carbon emissions target to limit global warming by 2050? Well, that's the question I wanted to answer too. So let's see what the research has to say about that. To understand how the Supreme Court's decision affects climate change, we have to set the stage first. First off, how accurate is this graph? Well, a link from the post leads to Statista, which is a site that provides market and consumer data in these neat little graphs. However, when I try to click on the source of the data for this graph, I'm prompted to subscribe in order to see it. That's pretty weird. Usually citations are the free part, but I guess we can try finding data from other places and see how they compare. So that's exactly what I did. While I struggled to find graphs that mimic the Statista one, I did find other articles that are just as concerning. Back in February of 2021, everyone got in trouble. The UN released a report on the need for greater ambition to reduce carbon emissions. This came from the Paris Agreement in 2015, which saw 192 countries sign an agreement that we would become global carbon emission neutral by 2050. Since that was back in 2015, the UN had a check-in in early 2021 where countries submitted their updated plans. The only problem was the plans would have put us at just 1% below our carbon emissions levels in 2010, which is a far cry from the 45% below 2010 target by 2030. Then came COP26. Okay, I'm gonna try to make this simple and easy to understand. COP26 was the UN climate change conference held in Glasgow, Scotland in late 2021. This conference led to what is known as the Glasgow Climate Pact. You can look at this as the new and updated Paris Agreement from back in 2015. The problem with COP26 was that many critics and scientists feel like it didn't go far enough. To be clear, the agreement that was reached is a big improvement over what the UN saw from plans earlier in 2021, but it's still a far cry from where it needs to be. So let me give you some numbers to make this a little bit clearer. Based on our current output of carbon emissions, we should expect for the Earth's temperature to rise about 2.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So 2.5 degrees Celsius hotter than the Earth before we started burning fossil fuels at scale. Now that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but the reality is when the Earth gets hotter, that means a more extreme weather like tornadoes, hurricanes, droughts, and flooding, with those things happening in places where they didn't before. That destroys nature, land, cities, and most of all, people. So unchecked, we would hit 2.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. Based on the Paris Agreement, we set the target at 1.5 degrees Celsius or less by 2050, which had two main checkpoints. One, by 2030, we had to drop our emissions to 45% below where we were in 2010. And two, by 2050, we have to be net, meaning we take in as much carbon as we emit. Now, the problem. Based on the plans in early 2021, we would have missed our first checkpoint in 2030 since we would only be 1% lower than we were in 2010. I haven't taken math in a long time, but I'm pretty sure 1 is pretty far from 45. Now, based on the updates from the Glasgow Climate Pact, the new agreement means we will be 31% lower than we were in 2010 by 2030. Now, 31 is a lot closer to 45 than 1 is, but they still aren't the same things, meaning we are likely going to miss our 1.5 degrees Celsius target. Other problems at COP26 involve the missing money for developing countries that will be most damaged by climate change and a softer stance on moving away from fossil fuels. So as you can see, we were already on the E for effort track and then came the US Supreme Court. The US Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, is responsible for protecting the environment and people from potential hazards and health risks through research and regulation. While the EPA isn't perfect, we are much better with it than we are without it. On June 30th of 2022, the Supreme Court ruled that the EPA was overstepping its bounds and cannot apply regulations that affect areas of the economy without approval from Congress first. So what was the EPA doing that triggered the Supreme Court to react this way? Basically, what had happened was the EPA sets emissions limits for power plants that states enforce through their own laws, and this has been fine since 1970. However, in 2015, the EPA went after coal power plants and put a new rule in place that said they must reduce the amount of power they produce or subsidize renewable energy in hopes of reducing our carbon emissions. Essentially, they were trying to force a shift in how we produce the electricity we rely upon. This is because coal power plants are our biggest producer of carbon emissions in this country. With the US being the second highest producer of carbon emissions by country and one of the highest producers of carbon per person, you can see how that seemed like a good idea. However, the Supreme Court didn't feel the same way. In a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court decided that the EPA has to seek specific authorization from Congress to regulate a sector before their regulations are valid. That's a tall order to fill when the US Congress isn't really known for working together very well in the last few years. And that is why you're seeing all these articles talking about the Supreme Court decision. What happens to the plan when one of the largest producers of carbon emissions prevents itself from reducing carbon emissions? How will we even hit the 34% mark by 2030 if one of the biggest players is sitting on the bench? These are the questions we are trying to answer, and depending on your outlook, you may feel as if we have no shot. Well, we still might have one. You remember when I said that 2.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels is what would happen if we kept our current rate? Well, that was using one of the worst case scenario projections. This is a graph of several SSPs, or shared socioeconomic pathways, and how the Earth's temperature will change in each of them. They model different scenarios of what would happen depending on what the world does, from basically doing nothing at all to being super aggressive about climate change. As you can see, that 2.5 degrees Celsius number assumes the world follows one of the more lax approaches to carbon emissions. Depending on who you talk to, some scientists say these scenarios are unrealistic and shouldn't even be considered, while others say the opposite. In my opinion, there's enough push right now in the world to avoid these worst case scenarios. However, I'm not sure by how much. And to be honest, no one knows. At the end of the day, these are just projections made by really smart people who dedicate their lives to studying this stuff, but still projections. None of us know the future, but what is really clear is that we have to reduce our human contribution to climate change. While we are doing that, there are definitely ways we can go even further. So if the question is, are we screwed? I would say maybe, but not really, to kinda sorta. Everyone seems to be saying the right things, but this recent Supreme Court decision seems like a step in the wrong direction. Let me know what you think about our chances to hit the 2050 target in the comments right below that like button. I'm Lumi, thanks for coming to the Benchtop, and before you go, check out this video on why millennials are losing their mega knees. And yes, I'm serious. Statista. I cannot say that word. Statista. Okay, cool. That's gonna be really hard.